This is an interesting episode that we're bringing you today because there were a lot of rookie defensive tackles that entered into the league this year. So basically how it shakes up for you and I here in our top 24. Joe, why don't you start off first? Who do you got in tier number one?
All right. In my tier number one, at number one, I've got Jalen Carter. Number two, Kalijah Cansey. Number three, Jeffrey Simmons. And number four, Quinnen Williams.
Okay, at number one, I've got Jalen Carter. Two, Quinnen Williams. Three, Jeffrey Simmons. Four, Kobe Turner. Five, Kalijah Cansey. And six, Mason Graham. I will say, I am quite surprised. I thought, based on what everyone heard for the first time, including me, because I don't know what you're going to say prior to us going through our rankings of tiers. You had Abdul Carter number one in the Dynasty defensive end rankings of tiers. Based on where Mason Graham was selected and based on, him coming into the draft and all of the hype that he had surrounding him and being from Michigan, as you're a Michigan man, Joe, surprised that he didn't make your tier one.
Yeah, no, he didn't. Yeah, he didn't make my tier one. I mean, partially just because I'm not sure. I think he will be a good player, but the question is he going to be like that top tier generational player? And that's where I'm not so sure. Like, I don't know if he has necessarily the upside of a Jalen Carter. Not to say he doesn't have that ability. They're just different players. He's not like a big physical imposing player. Like he's a crafty guy that knows how to, creatively several moves get past offensive linemen. But I wouldn't say like he's that dominant force guy.
But I mean, even look at Jalen Carter, who I also have at number one. So keep that in mind. Last season he had 4.5 sacks. In his rookie year, he had 6 sacks. So I mean, he's done pretty good, but he hasn't been anything elite as of yet. Obviously, he's an elite prospect. He has done well. Sometimes the sack numbers, we got to look at pressure rate. You got to look at all that stuff. And I think he's blossoming, and I think you do too.
Yeah, and I mean, just the tough part is too with defensive tackles. Like I really do. It typically takes some time for them to get acclimated to the NFL, get some time under their belts. And I'm curious to see if this year three for Jalen Carter turns out to be like that big turning point for him, and we see more of a breakout and maybe an increase in production.
Now you have Kalijah Cansey a lot higher than most. You've got him at number 2. I have him at number 5. I was honestly, you had talked about this before, and I looked at it a little bit deeper, and I was kind of convinced looking at it. I mean, if you look at Cansey, he's a guy who I think is somewhat underrated, honestly. You look at, he's been in the league for 2 years, similar to Jalen Carter. He's 24 years old, but he had 7.5 sacks last year, only playing in 12 games, where he had 4 sacks in 2023. And in his rookie year, he played 14 games. So one thing is his health. He hasn't been able to, play a full season yet. But that, Buck's defensive line, I think, is somewhat underrated. They've got some really good interior rushers with Vita Vea and Kalijah Cansey on the outside. Maybe not as notable. You got guys like Yaya Diaby, but they did bring in Hassan Reddick. I do think that's an upgrade for them. So he's got a decent, I guess, what do I want to say, players across the defensive line that help him out. But what were your thoughts there for Cansey at number 2 for you?
Yeah, part of it is just rookie year he had 4 sacks last year. He jumps to 7.5 sacks, and I was taking a look at the guys fantasy points per game in our Fantrax league for IDP scoring. I mean, he finished defensive tackle number 8, and he was averaging just under 19 points per game in our league as well. So I just think the fact that he's 24, like if for the similar reasons that Jalen Carter's there. I mean, honestly, in our fantasy league, Cansey's been the more productive player. So in the same age, I felt like he should be right there at number 2. If I justify Carter 1, I feel like Cansey's got to be 2.
Now, one guy I'm a little shocked about, because you're always higher than me on him, is Kobe Turner. I can't believe I am higher on him than you are. But honestly, I look, and you look at the numbers. I mean, how do you go against the numbers? He had 8 sacks last year with 62 total tackles. The year before that, 57 total tackles and 9 sacks. I was worried about what it would look like without Aaron Donald, and he proved me wrong. So I think it did help with them drafting Braden Fisk and him being as good as he was in his rookie year, and Jared Verse. So there were some good additions to that defensive line that helped him. But what made you not put Kobe Turner here in tier 1, Joe?
Yeah, you make a good case. The fact that he's 26, he's been a productive guy. I don't know. I just felt like some of these other guys have just had the longer success and should honestly just be in tier 1. And I left him off.
Honestly, he's not a household name. You got to remember he was a late round selection in the draft. I want to say, was it like fourth or fifth round or something like that? To Wake Forest, I want to say. Like it was pretty late. So he's a guy that people don't really know much about when he first came in, but he came in the league by storm. And then, like I said, I thought it was due to Donald, but he kept it up. So he's not a guy I necessarily seek out and try to get. But he's just one of those, when you look at the numbers, it's just hard to refute it.
Yeah, definitely. Look, it was a guy that I was definitely high on. Saw the things. When I drafted him in our dynasty league, you laughed at me. Didn't see the value in the pick. But it is what it is. But he has been very productive here.
So let's head over to tier number 2.
All right, and tier number 2 and number 5, I've got Kobe Turner. Then at number 6, I've got Zach Allen. 7, Dexter Lawrence. 8, DeForest Buckner, and 9, Derek Brown.
Okay, at number 7, we've got DeForest Buckner. 8, Chris Jones. 9, Walter Nolan. 10, Johnny Newton. 11, Braden Fisk. And 12, Byron Murphy II. So per usual, we talk about Kobe Turner, and you just missed your tier 1, and he's the first guy in tier 2 as usual. Now, it's interesting. Other than DeForest Buckner, you and I did not have the same players here. So I guess I'm going to do something a little bit different. Based on what you see in my tier, what jumps out at you? Whether you like or don't like, you considered it. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I guess the one person we're going to differ on there is going to be, Chris Jones. Still having him up there, tier 2 at number 8. With his age, and I with just looking at his number, he also just hasn't been the same guy of the last couple of years as well. So I'm gonna talk about him later. He is in my top 24 though.
Yeah, I could see where you might say he's fallen off. If you look at over the past few seasons, right? So this past year he had 5 sacks. Before that, 10.5, 15.5, 9, 7.5, 9, 15.5, and then 6.5. So this was, other than his rookie year, this was the lowest total that he's ever had. So you could say, is it possible that he's maybe hit a wall? He is 30 years old, and we know that defensive tackles can play late in their career. That's why this is a tough one, because you see a guy like Cam Hayward, he's the Iron Man, right? He's 36 years old or whatever. Calais Campbell, right, who is kind of a tweener type, right? These guys are playing late in their career. So I felt as though I struggled with guys like Buckner and Jones because they've been the model of consistency, for, past 5, 6, 7 years. These guys have been at the cream of the crop. And Buckner, he obviously had his injury. But I felt like, how do you balance those top performers with these new rookies? And that's what, or these young guys. So I'm surprised because in the DNs, you really hit home the young players, but not as much on the D tackles. But you feel that it takes a while for defensive tackles to develop, and that's
honestly, the defensive tackles has been my hardest position group that we've done. And
really,
it's really tough because I was trying to just think of my overall strategy and how to rank these guys. And partially it's because of, like you said, there's really some young players. There's some interesting guys that were even drafted. But then there's just like guys, sure, they have the potential, but what value are they going to provide you now, I guess, where like you've got the mainstays like the DeForest Buckner. He's been one of the most consistent defensive tackles, just looking over his numbers. And just like, how do you balance that? And ultimately I kind of chose, the consistent production over what could possibly be in a few years. And I don't know I don't really know what the right approach or wrong approach is there, but that's just kind of how I saw it, because I was having trouble where to ultimately slot these young guys and how do I ultimately do that. Yes, they're going to have a longer, output potential over the years, but it's just like if I'm looking at it like who would I rather have now, now I'd probably, prioritize some of these guys that are more consistent production and I know exactly what I'm getting from them.
Yeah, I felt really strongly about as far as the young guys go. I felt really strongly. I mean, I'm a big fan of Walter Nolan. I think he has immense upside. Now, I don't necessarily love the landing spot in Arizona. However, I think he has. I mean, he was the number one recruit coming out of high school. He's shown a lot of flashes. I think he could really take it to the next level. I'm a big fan of Nolan, so I felt like he had to be in here. I also was a big fan of Johnny Newton or Jerzon Newton because he's a guy who has that sack upside that we saw in Illinois. And now that Jonathan Allen is no longer there, Fedarian Mathis is no longer there, it's Newton's has this opportunity now. There's Newton and Deron Payne. And Deron Payne, I mean, he had one really good year in the contract year. That's about it. So this is Johnny Newton's opportunity to really take the league by storm. I feel really good that he could. Fisk, I mean, look at the numbers, man. I mean, he did great. I was really surprised, but I mean, he's got 8.5 sacks, 44 total tackles. Well, he's 25 years old, played 1 year in the league. Hard to go against that, right? We're talking about dynasty here. The one I struggled with the most was Byron Murphy. I was very close to not including him here and moving him down. The thing is, as I had him rated higher, I had him as the top defensive tackle of the class last year. And I think that he didn't get as many opportunities because of Leonard Williams being there, as well as Jerron Reed. Now they're both still there, so that's where I'm like, is Murphy going to get a lot of action? He only had a half of a sack, so he really hasn't been used as much as I thought he would. That was a tougher one for me. I like the potential of the guy, but it could take a few years. I don't know. That was the hardest one for me to put, honestly. I was like, where do I put this guy?
Yeah, he definitely was a tough one, and just like you mentioned, just with Leonard Williams potentially being there for another 2 years, also keeping Reed and the defensive line's pretty similar, and he didn't see the field a lot as a rookie. How much of that will change in his second year here? That's kind of to be determined.
And one guy you and I are going to disagree on, and I'll hold on from talking about it, is Derek Brown. I'm a little surprised that you have him as high as you do. Obviously, coming from an injury, so sometimes people forget about. It's like, oh, I forgot about him. And like, well, it's a reason he was out for the. I think he missed most of the games. He was on IR, but the year before that, he was dominant.
Yeah, and that's just that. I do think the fact that it was a meniscus. I don't know. I don't think that's as tough as an injury to come back from as like a ACL. I don't know if he'll ever hit that 100 tackles that he hit in his big year before that. But and he also is a guy that's kind of tough because he doesn't really provide that much sack upside. He's a guy that really relies on getting a lot of tackles, but he's shown to be a guy that gets a high amount of tackles. But I think just his youth and his ability and what he's shown is kind of why I ranked him here.
Well, that's my issue. I mean, he has to get a ton of tackles in order for him to be deserving, because the most sacks that he's ever had was 3, and he's played in the league for 5 years. So by the 1 year, he played 1 game. So you can kind of maybe put that one out onto the side. But that's my biggest problem with the guy is you want guys to have that sack upside. He's never going to have it.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that is fair, but I just think he'll get enough tackles to possibly make up for it. Where a lot of those sack guys that had the sack upside don't provide as many tackles as he does get.
That is true. So let's head over to tier number 3, Joe. Who do you got there?
All right, in tier number 3 and number 10, I got Leonard Williams at 11, Zach Sealer, 12, Christian Wilkins, 13, Gervin Dexter rather, 14, Christian Barmore, and 15, Braden Fisk.
All right, at 13, I got Christian Wilkins, 14, Zach Allen, 15, Dexter Lawrence, 16, Nnamdi Matabuke, and 17, Jonathan Allen. So one of the guys I think is really interesting in this tier, interesting that you and I both had him in this tier, but I struggled with him. I didn't know what to do with him, was Christian Wilkins, a guy who I had as high as tier 1 back in the day. But the tough part with him is he heavily relies on tackles. He was really good in that Miami system. He missed 5 games, he only played in 5 games, last year with the Raiders. Now we've got Pete Carroll coming in. I think that'll help him, but I don't know for sure. I wondered if I was rating him too low, only 29 years old.
Yeah, he was a really tough guy for me to rank. And just the fact that, like you said, I mean, he's getting up there in age. He's he had his best days in Miami. He also then he gets injured with the Raiders, but then you got the Pete Carroll effect, and how does that shake up that defensive line and ultimately this Raiders defense as well? So I kind of just based on his ranking, kind of what I think could happen, and does he kind of maybe return somewhat to the production we were used to with Miami?
It's possible. I mean, I think he could definitely, be. I think he'll have. I mean, no doubt he'll have a better year than last year.
Yeah, and that's yeah. I mean, but he was honestly like talk about a guy that I was just like constantly moving around trying to figure out a spot for him. He was one of those guys.
One guy you'll be probably shocked about that I don't have, but I just couldn't find a spot for him. I do not have Zach Seiler in my top 24.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy I wanted to put in there, but ultimately, one of the reasons why I really decided not to is I think the addition of Kenneth Grant is really going to hurt Seiler because you don't think so.
I mean, I don't really necessarily. I'm not sure because I mean, even like the one year he's one of the like in 2022, like when Christian Wilkins was there. I mean, he still had a pretty good year. Not nearly as good as like 2023 and 2024, but I feel like could he just be kind of coming on late here? But even in that like 2022 season, he had 3.5 sacks, 70 tackles, was averaging 17.4 fantasy points per game in our league, which is still pretty good at the defensive tackle position.
It's totally possible. I mean, I do like him. I just really, balancing out the youth plus proven guys. Like, I mean, for me, I'm assuming you have Jonathan Allen in your top 24.
I don't.
Okay, interesting. So I have Jonathan Allen in my top 24. You don't, but you have Zach Seiler, and I don't. I'm surprised why you don't have Jonathan Allen. I think him in Minnesota could be very good.
Yeah, I mean, I do think him in Minnesota is a better situation for him than than it has been with Washington. But just going kind of off of I don't know. Yeah, I mean, last year he had his best year in 2022 with the 7.5 sacks. He had the 9 the prior year, but in terms of like fantasy points in our Fantrax league, his best output was averaging 22.7 points per game in 2022. Then it dropped down to 16.5 and 263 total points in 2023. Then he was only averaging 13 points per game, last year, and he's also 30.
Yeah, but he only played 8 games last year. I mean, if you look at it when he's really good, he has a bankable like low 60s total tackle range, and he has a sack upside of possibly 7 through 9. So, and I think he could do very well in that Minnesota defense with Brian Flores. They also brought in Javon Hargrave, if I'm not mistaken. So you have him, a big body guy in there, kind of frees him up. You've got some really good edge rushers with Grenard and Van Ginkel and Dallas Turner. So I think that defensive line is going to be feisty. I think Allen could have a really, really good season. I think that's a travesty you don't have him in your top 24.
That's interesting. I mean, it's also a lot of guys that have in a continuous rotation as well, where he didn't necessarily have that much competition in Washington.
That's true, but you always say that allows the guys to stay fresh.
Yeah, it can. But yeah, I mean, it can be looked at it either way. I think maybe less important for the edge rushers, but maybe could be a different story for those interior guys.
Now I'm a little surprised that you don't have Matabuke in here yet because you're a Matabuke guy.
Yeah, but then you always told me I was over ranking him. Then kind of like looking at the numbers and stuff, I was really wondering if I just have been just overblowing it and letting that 2023 season really just kind of pull the curtain over my eyes and blind me a bit. Because I mean, outside of that, like I just wonder if he'll ever hit. I don't know if he'll. I mean, obviously, 13 sacks is a lot to hit. But in terms of like averaging 22 fantasy points per game in our league, he's never even come close to hitting that, except for that 1 year. And I'm just wondering if that was an anomaly and that's not who he is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you. That's one thing that I definitely take into consideration is that 1 year he just went absolutely off. He had still a decent year this past year, which kind of makes me feel a little bit better with 43 total tackles, with the 6.5 sacks. That makes me feel a little better. Far cry from what he had with the 13 sacks. I think that was sort of an anomaly, but he's 27 years old too, so he's still relatively young.
Yeah, I mean, he was another tough guy, just because, like you said, he is 27, but it's just like it. I think he's closer to his output that he's been producing outside of the 1 year than he is that one big year. So, I mean, not to say that you have him like well overranked either. I think 16 is a potentially a fair spot for him.
So let's head over to tier number 4.
All right, and my tier number 4 at number 16, I've got Byron Murphy the second, 17 Jerzon Newton, 18 Chris Jones, and 19 Namdi Madubuke, and 20 Ed Oliver.
Okay, at number 18, I've got Derek Brown, 19 Ed Oliver, and number 20 Leonard Williams. It's interesting so far. We still have not seen a rookie out of you, Joe, which shocks me, based on how the draft went this past draft. Now, I do think it's interesting that you also have Ed Oliver in this tier. He was a guy I struggled with. I think my homer, was coming out of me thinking that he's Ed Oliver. I gotta have him right there. But it's just like my only thing with Ed Oliver is he had the one really good year with 9.5 sacks, and he got paid. Besides that, he's been pretty mediocre.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, he was a guy that I struggled with and was kind of toyed with. Do I have him in there or do I prioritize other people? Ultimately see the upside, and I think it'll be interesting with the Bills' defensive line. Obviously, there's drafted a lot of guys, potentially a big rotation there, but ultimately, we've seen it out of at Oliver. That's kind of the tough thing. Does he rebound to that 1 year? But I guess I was giving him one last opportunity to see what he could possibly do, and then maybe I adjust from there.
Well, it's a good opportunity for him. Like you said, I mean, the defensive line is in a much better place. He's not going to be double teamed as much. I think he's going to have much more opportunities to get after the quarterback. And you got to remember, he's only 27 years old. So that to me also is right. You have to consider that piece. Other than that, though, honestly, you and I mean, we're starting to say some of the same players now. But I had talked about Derek Brown before, where I felt like he should be. Now, you and I are quite different on Leonard Williams. I've got him at 20. You've got him at 10. That's a pretty decent jump. I feel like he probably only has one more year left in Seattle. I think after that, he's probably going to get cut. I don't think they're going to pay him, what he's, based on the cap hit charge. Now, obviously, he had a dominant year this past year. There's no denying that. With 11 sacks. But I don't know. I mean, is it just going based off the recency bias? I mean, he has had 11.5 sacks before in New York in 2020. This was his best year, though, of his career, honestly.
Yeah, it definitely was. By far, but I don't know. He's just been a pretty consistent guy, and just wondering, like, now that he's in a better opportunity with the Seahawks, it could just be for one more year with the potential of two. He is 30 years old, but we are seeing guys go into their mid 30s and still be, relevant and even fantasy relevant. So that's kind of what I was, kind of viewing him as. And does he with staying in Seattle and having, better players around him, does he keep performing at a higher level?
Let's head over to our final tier number 5, Joe. Who do you got there?
All right, and tier number 5 at 21, I got Brian Brezzi, 22, Mason Graham, 23, Kenneth Grant, and 24, Derek Harmon.
All right, at 21, I've got Derek Harmon, 22, Gervin Dexter, 23 Brian Brezzi, and 24 Christian Barmore. So I ended up putting Christian Barmore here in tier number 5. Now you and I have him a little bit. I have him at 24. You have him at 14. My biggest concern with him, I didn't have him last time in the top 24, was what's going to happen with the blood clot issue. Everything seems to point that he's coming back. However, for me, with my risk tolerance, it's like, okay, it's pointing in the right direction, but he's not out of the woods yet. So to me, it's like I can't justify. There's a point where it's like you look at a player's potential and you take that into account. And when do you have to say, okay, now we've reached that point where it's like, irregardless if he just is like done with the league, I still got to take a shot at this guy. That was 24 for me. But you must have a bigger risk tolerance than I do.
Well, I mean, I like I keep saying, I don't know much about the whole blood clot situation and how much likelier it may or may not be to have more in the future. But I feel like, I had him in the top 24, but he was ranked lower. But now the fact that I know he's coming back and the Patriots now have an even more stacked defensive line, and if he comes back and is, even close to the same guy that we've seen before, I mean, we've seen this guy as a dominant young defensive tackle. And if he can kind of return to his form, then, I think, he's closer to the top 15 here than he is in the bottom half.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. I mean, to my opinion, though, he only had one really good year. In 2023, he had 64 total tackles and 8.5 sacks. That was the year you're talking about. Other than that, he's been a disappointment.
Yeah, but I mean, he's still also a young player with, I feel like more to give. And like we keep saying, it takes a little bit for defensive tackles to really get going. And he was a guy I was excited about, but unfortunately, didn't get to see him with the whole blood clot issue.
No, another guy that you and I are a little bit different on, I'm kind of curious your thoughts on him, is Gervin Dexter. I've got him here at 22. You've got him all the way up at 13. So you have a lot higher ceiling in your mind of Gervin Dexter than I do.
Yeah, I mean, he's 23 years old. He was averaging 15 points per game last year. Really solid. I mean, he doubled his sack number. He also had 31 more tackles in year 2. I just think he's gonna continue his upward trajectory from last year.
Are you not concerned about it's not Eberflus's defense anymore?
And I mean, I didn't really put too much thought into that. I mean, I guess there could be some concern there, but I was just kind of looking at it just from a pure player standpoint and just seeing the jump he made in year 2 and thinking that being that it can take some time for these defensive tackles, that he'll just kind of keep going on that upward trajectory.
Lastly here, I'm a little surprised you decided to put Kenneth Grant in here and no Walter Nolan at all in your top 24. What was your reasoning there?
Yeah, I mean, I think Kenneth Grant's got a really high ceiling.
Even though he's a nose tackle.
Yeah, I mean, because even though he's a nose tackle, I think he's got the potential to turn into being more than just a nose tackle and provide that sack upside. Like I keep saying, I mean, the Michigan coaches would just rave about the guy and just how much potential and the height of a ceiling he had. And a lot of people think he's got a higher ceiling than even Mason Graham with just some of the intangibles that he has at his side and the way he moves.
So you basically see him as a Dexter Lawrence, because Dexter Lawrence is kind of more of that nose tackle. A lot of these guys are not your one nose tackle types that end up being really productive. So you feel as though Grant will kind of be in that type of mold.
Yeah, I think Kenneth Grant could turn into that type of mold. And honestly, I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, my tier 5 here is kind of more of the potential and what could be. So
I see that. I see that. It finally came. I was wondering when it was coming, but it came before the end here.
Yeah, I mean, look, like you said, there was a lot of interesting rookies to consider, and ultimately where to put them. So I kind of just made tier 5 my potential tier and lumped them in there.